All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Deep Cover podcast. This is episode 14 of the podcast, and I was always wondering when the revisiting of a topic would happen, and it so happens that's today. And if you remember, in the first episode of the pod, I was joined by Nick Andre, writer, podcaster, and general basketball reporter, but somebody who focuses a lot on women's basketball. Had him on to talk about Caitlin Clark. Now, 14 episodes ago, 13 episodes ago, that was a few months ago, right? A lot has changed since then. And Nick and I, when we were talking, it was right before the WNBA draft. It was right after the NCAA tournament had concluded, where Iowa, Caitlin Clark's team, had lost in the championship. And it seems like the conversation around Clark has really only intensified since she got drafted by the Fever, started playing in WNBA games, and now here we are today, where there's just a ton of discourse about her, about where she stands in the league, about the marketability of women's basketball, about the Olympics. There's just a lot of stuff going on. So I wanted to try and cover off on some of that and really offer a perspective of what's going on here and why there's just so much conversation around Caitlin Clark at the current moment, and why a lot of women's basketball fans and WNBA fans have been feeling a certain type of way about this sort of commentary. So let's kind of dive right in and let's talk about the most pressing news of the day, which is the fact that Clark was left off of the women's national team for the Paris Olympics this summer. And of course, people who are jumping into the WNBA, jumping into women's basketball because of Clark have a huge problem with this, right? Because they're saying, hey, I only watch women's basketball because I saw what Clark was doing at Iowa. It was fascinating, and now I'm watching the league and, realizing there's a lot of awesome players in the league right now. AJ Wilson's making the team. Sabrina Ionescu's making the team. Chelsea Gray's making the team. A lot of excellent talent has made this team for the women's national team, but not Caitlin Clark. So those people are like, well, she's the whole reason I'm watching. Why wouldn't you have her in? Right? The alternative opinion on this matter has been that, well, she's just not good enough to compete at the Olympic level right now. Now, you have to remember, there's something about the Olympics with Americans that is very much rooted in winning. We watch the Olympics because our country typically has the most gold medals or just raw medal count of anybody else. In team sports, like basketball especially, we expect to win. We expect our men's team to get gold medals. We expect our women's team to get gold medals. And the women have done that. 7 Olympics in a row. They've gotten gold medals. They want to ensure that they have the best possible players on the roster to compete at the Olympics. And that is what people who've been watching the game and people who've been watching somebody like Jewel Lloyd kind of develop and what kind of player they are today, not what they're going to be tomorrow, have no problem with Caitlin Clark being omitted, right? They think that it makes perfect sense. And from the perspective of the fact that Caitlin, because she jumped straight from finishing her college career right into the WNBA and really hasn't had a break in between, hasn't really had an opportunity to train with these Olympians and train with this team to be able to really form a cohesive unit. And let's be honest, she probably wouldn't have been starting or anything like that. Probably would have been a situation where if they were running rampant over a underwomaned team, that they would throw Caitlin in there, when the US team was up 20 or 30, right? And her fans, right, the new WNBA fans are saying, that's great. I would tune in for that, right? But we are kind of dismissing the fact that you're trying to put in Caitlin Clark just for the ratings aspect. And you might think she's the reason I'm watching basketball, so she must be the best player in the league. Caitlin Clark is not the best player in the WNBA right now. That's AJ Wilson, right? And you can argue Jewel Lloyd is playing better right now. You can argue Chelsea Gray is playing better right now. You can argue Sabrina Ionescu is better right now. These are guards, right? That would be deprioritized for Clark. And a lot of people will point to the fact that, hey, Caitlin Clark has, set all these rookie records. She is really up there in terms of scoring and assist numbers, and she just dropped 30 the other night, right? And she's starting to figure it out. But here's the problem. She also leads the league in turnovers. And if you think that the WNBA is physical, which we're going to get to in a second, that's what the Olympics is. Think about from the men's side, right? We always see the, guys come on podcasts once they've retired who've been in the Olympics before and say, look, it's FIBA rules, it's different, it's more physical, it's just a total different game than what we have in the NBA. So if there's concerns about Caitlin Clark's durability right now in the WNBA, those are only going to be magnified in the Olympics, right? So I think the decision to leave her off is a good one from a basketball perspective. There's another conversation to be had about the marketability perspective, but we'll get to that later on. I do want to focus in on the targeting and bullying narrative, right? So there has been a lot of discussions since the WNBA league year started about Caitlin Clark being the golden child, right? And that she's being targeted and that she's being attacked. Kennedy Carter from the Chicago Sky, hit her with a cheap shot, a couple weeks back. And it was a called foul initially, but it was upgraded to a flagrant after the fact. And a lot of people took that as like, oh, well, she's jealous of Caitlin Clark. And the league is, all these women are jealous of Caitlin Clark because she's bringing in all this attention and all this stuff, right? And for me, as somebody who's watched a little bit of WNBA, but who's watched a lot more NBA, I think you see this all the time from a top draft pick, right? Like you'll again watch guys on podcasts and see some new rookie coming in, and you wanted to show them that you were like that, right? You wanted to show them that you were the best that's out, and that they are all this hyped up thing, but you got to show them that in this league it's different. Reggie Miller was recently talking about that on a podcast appearance, saying how, hey, look, when I was coming out of UCLA, I thought I was hot shit. But in reality, I wasn't ready for the man's game that was the NBA. And just consider it from this perspective. I always hate when people say, oh, hey, could the Alabama football team beat the worst NFL team, right? Like if the Jaguars were the worst team in the league, could they, what would happen if they played, the best college team? The answer is the NFL team is going to win probably by 50. The NBA team is going to win by 40. The worst WNBA team against the best college women's college team is going to annihilate them. The reason is all these players that are on a roster in the professionals, one, they are professionals and their only focus is to get better and play basketball. Two, they were all highly touted draft picks, all Americans, won awards, dominated on the college level before going into the NBA, WNBA, NFL, whatever league. And so there's an adjustment period to go from college to going to the WNBA. If you really think about it from Caitlin Clark's perspective, it's really only two players, with her and Kate Martin from that Iowa team, that were good enough to make it to the league, right? So conversely, all the teams she was playing against, only a handful of them are in the league, not the entire roster. So there is a talent gap that you have to account for. And a lot of people thought that Clark was just going to come into the league and start dominating. And that's just not the case. They are finding very early that the WNBA is a very physical league, even though we're used to what the NBA offers. The WNBA is a little bit of a different animal, right? They are physical, they are competitive. And, when I used to say, and I'll get to this analogy, bring it home a little bit later on, but that the WNBA today reminds me of the 70s and 80s in the NBA. That's part of the reason. There's a physicality there that a lot of people might not assume is there because they just haven't watched it, right? So you can say that Caitlyn is being targeted and bullied, and all these other women are jealous. But the reality of the situation is that this is a rookie initiation type thing. Every single high draft pick rookie that I've seen in any sport over the years has always had a welcome to the league moment. You'll have countless podcasts and they'll have former players on and they'll ask them, what was your welcome to the league moment? All the smoke with Steven Jackson and Matt Barnes. They ask that all the time of NBA players. And then they'll be like, yeah, there was this average middling player who just gave me that work. And, I realized, oh, this is different now. And that's what we're seeing, right? You can argue about the fact that maybe some people are bitter that a white woman is coming into the league and dominating. That's that's part of the reason why she's getting the attention. But I also feel it's a little disingenuous to Clark's talent, because she is a fantastic talent, regardless of her ethnicity, right? And so a lot of people are just quick to jump to this. Women are jealous. Women are catty with one another. They don't want to prop somebody up to elevate the game for the greater good. But to me, if you're not on the Indiana Fever, your entire objective is to beat Caitlin Clark, right? Her and Aaliyah Boston are the two people you should be focusing on for your game plan every single time you play them. So yeah, they're going to get all up in her face. They've seen the tape. They've seen the scouting report. They see what she likes to do, where she likes to pull the shot from. And ultimately, Caitlin will figure that out, right? Just as all the great players figure it out. If she doesn't figure it out, she'll be out of the league, right? That's just kind of the way it goes. But the idea that it's targeted because of who she is, more so than just a typical "I'm gonna show this rookie what's what," feels a little misguided to me. And that brings us to the jealousy aspect, right? Or the perceived jealousy aspect. And it started when Diana Taurasi, who's amazingly 41 and still playing and putting up really good numbers in the WNBA, came out and said that Caitlin Clark will realize that this league is tough, that she's going to be playing against grown ass women, to use her term. And, a lot of people scoffed her. It's like, oh, she's just jealous of this, jealous of that, whatever. And I think it's rooted in this sort of misogynistic wrapping that we have, where there's this idea that women don't want other women to succeed, and that they are saying this to be catty, or they're saying this to be to prop themselves up and diminish somebody who's coming in and looking to advance the game. And my feeling on that is these people are just leaning in on stereotypes and just running with it. The problem that you have with all of this is that we're just falling victim to narratives that have been tropes that have been thrown around about women all the time, right? And in this social media age, those type of voices and that kind of noise gets really amplified to the nth degree. Is there jealousy? I don't think so. I think these are all just competitors. I think ultimately most WNBA players realize that the moment they have in front of them is one where more eyeballs are coming in on the league, right? And you can say that, hey, the WNBA has always been a great product and people just haven't been paying attention, whatever the case may be. And that's probably true. And it is true, right? Like the WNBA has had tremendous players over the years. Candace Parker, Maya Moore, obviously Diana Taurasi now, Sue Bird, Brianna Stewart currently, AJ Wilson currently, all these great players that have dominated on the international stage as well. So it's not just they're just being the best in the WNBA thing. The idea that it's just jealousy, no, they see the fact that this person who has all this fanfare for whatever reason you think she has the fanfare, she has it. They are moving games to bigger arenas to accommodate when she's in town, right? They just had to move their game against the Mystics. Now, keep in mind, both of these teams are not good. I think at the time they had a 3-win total between both of them, right? They're at the bottom of the league and they filled out 20,000 seats. That's because people are fascinated by Caitlin Clark and want to see her play. And I think most WNBA players realize that this is good for their game overall. It's good for them when the next collective bargaining agreement comes around so that their salaries can be increased. And that's the irony of it. People are just kind of talking about all this jealousy stuff. Deep down, WNBA players know that if Caitlin Clark is successful, that the media rights deals, which dictate what salaries are, is going to be through the roof the next time it comes up for bargaining in a few years, right? So if they they're incentivized to show that they're good, right? That hey, we're a strong league, we're an exciting league, all this stuff. We have this talent, and then because the eyeballs are on Caitlin, it shows everybody else, and then everybody wins because we've been bemoaning for years that WNBA players are underpaid, that they shouldn't have to go to Russia in the offseason like Brittany Griner did, and have to play in another league just to make more money, right? And a lot of people were talking that Caitlin Clark shouldn't have even gone to the WNBA. Should have gone to the Big Three because they would give her multi-million dollars. But she went to the WNBA because that's where all the best women play, and she's a competitor, just like all these other women are competitors. It's not a jealousy thing. That brings me to the 1980s analogy. So if you haven't read articles where I've just dictated this, podcasts where I've dictated this before, let me reset it for you. The WNBA has been going for almost 30 years, right? It reminds me so much of the NBA in the 1980s. Now hear me out. So right now, we've had two preeminent teams for the last couple of years here in the WNBA. The Las Vegas Aces and the New York Liberty. To me, it feels like Magic and Bird, right? It feels like Lakers Celtics in the 80s, where it just feels like these two teams are just on the collision course to meet with each other just because of all the talent that are Brianna Stewart and Sabrina Ionescu, crazy tandem in New York. AJ Wilson, Chelsea Gray, Kelsey Plum in the out west with the Aces, right? So it just feels like these two teams are on a collision course. They met in the finals last year. Las Vegas won. I wouldn't be surprised if they met in the finals this year, although Connecticut might have something to say about that. But so you have this like regional West Coast, East Coast rivalry brewing, right? So that's happening. Then you get a transcendent talent like Caitlin Clark coming to a bad team. It reminds me a lot of Jordan joining the Bulls in the mid 80s, right? And say what you will about that analogy, whether you agree with it or disagree with it, whatever the case may be. The fact is that the NBA was saved by that rivalry. The NBA in the 70s, I said this on the last episode, is kind of looked at negatively because there were no dynasties. There were no fascinating teams to see can they keep on doing it. You had the Knicks, the Blazers, the Sonics, the Bullets, all these teams winning titles in that era. But when the 80s came along, yeah, you had the 83 Sixers, and yeah, you had the late 80s Pistons teams. But overall, that decade was dominated by the Celtics and Lakers until that guy in Chicago, right? Michael Jordan, greatest basketball player ever, came in and took it to another level after getting beat down by the Pistons, the Lakers, the Celtics, the Sixers, the Bucks, all these teams that were kind of strong in the 80s in the East and in the NBA. So I feel like that's where we're at right now. And the reason why I think Caitlin Clark is like Michael Jordan, it's not just a talent thing, because of course Caitlin is incredibly talented. Jordan was incredibly talented as well. But it is the fact that they're made up of the same stuff. They have this, they've captivated these fans in a way that you cannot explain. Jordan was a high flyer in the 80s, and that just really mesmerized people, right? It helped to take the game global. And eventually, he was on an Olympic team that helped fulfill that prophecy. I think Caitlin will eventually be on an Olympic team that will help fulfill that prophecy. Not right now, but she's just not good enough, right? Like Jordan wasn't really a part of the whole '88 thing because of the whole, the college and then the dream team, whatever the case. But I think Clark will be in 2028 on the Olympic team, and then that'll help even further elevate the women's game because then she will be one of the best players America has to offer. But after that happened in the NBA, Magic and Bird helped to save the league. Jordan proliferated it onto another height, and they haven't looked back since, right? It's become a global game. It's become one of the most popular sports in the world. With Caitlin Clark and with this rivalry between Las Vegas and New York, we have the ingredients to do the same thing. So when you're looking at the way Jordan was handled earlier in his career, he was pushed down every time he got to the paint. There was criticisms about you can't win with a guard as your best player. How is that any different than what Caitlin Clark is going through right now in the sense of people saying she's too small for the league, got to bulk up, can't win with just somebody who's going to shoot threes and whatever, right? There's that same critique. League is too physical. League is too physical. That's what they said the NBA in the '80s. That's what they're saying about the WNBA now. So we're at an inflection point in a couple years here for Caitlin Clark where she's either going to figure it out like Jordan figured it out in the late '80s and figured out how to get past the Pistons in the '90s, or she's just going to become just an okay player who could have been better, had the talent. I think that she is such a hard worker. She is such a student of the game that she sees this and she's going to get better. She's already figuring it out, right? It's not going to be this year. It might not be next year. It might be the year after, but she is figuring it out. And she's eventually going to be the face of this league, whether we like it or not, right? And that kind of brings me to the casual fan dilemma that we're seeing manifest itself. There is a little bit, I will admit, of gatekeeping type of conversations happening around the WNBA. A guy like Nick Andre, who again came on my podcast a couple of times, he he's been watching for a long time. So a lot of times when people will come and say, "Well, you should be doing this for Caitlin Clark," and you should be, she's the only reason we're watching, yada yada yada. He, him, and people who have been watching as long as he has are going to say things like, "We don't have to watch, right? If you don't like it, don't watch it, right?" And and that's a totally plausible stance to have. The casual fan who has started to watch the league, I know a bunch who have started to watch the WNBA because of Caitlin Clark, because they were so fascinated by her at Iowa, right? Have tuned in for her. And they want to see their person get, be defended and, and be taken care of the way that a superstar should be taken care of in the NBA. And just they feel that that hasn't happened. But what's kind of coming is that those casual fans are going after the fans who started in watching this league and said, well, you should be propping her up. She's going to save your league. Your league was sorry before this, right? And the dedicated fans are coming back and saying, well, the league's always been good. You just haven't been watching because for whatever reason, you didn't believe in it. You thought that it wasn't any good or non-athletic or not exciting, whatever all the tropes have been about women's basketball over the years. And in a sense, the way I look at it is you have to embrace people coming to your game to watch the game and the growth that offers. As somebody who's watched a lot of NFL and NBA in my life, I know that a bandwagon casual fan coming along, while it may be annoying from the nuance that I crave as a fan, it is also a necessary situation to grow a league and to make sure that a league continues to advance. So I think that it's gotten a little toxic here, right? Where people are just kind of like, hey, if you don't like it, then F and leave, right? Whereas the casuals are like, well, your league would be dead if it weren't for people like us tuning in to watch Caitlin Clark. And I just think that we have to be a little bit better in a good faith argument here and understand that yes, there's great talent in the WNBA. Yes, there has always been great talent in the WNBA. You go all the way back to the inaugural season. Cheryl Swoops, Cynthia Cooper, Teresa Witherspoon. These are all great talents, right? That have been amazing athletes in their own regard in their eras, right? But also understand that Caitlin Clark bringing more eyeballs in is also going to bring more criticisms in. And what I was always afraid of when I knew this was going to happen was that we would pivot away from just having good natured debates about the player and the games and then to evolve it into something much less important, right? Much less nuanced, much less engaging. And just kind of just like there's been the race stuff, right? Which is like, well, they're just jealous of Caitlin Clark, all American girl, which is dipped in racism, like let's be honest. And or they're just like, well, they need to protect her because she's the only hope that the league has. She's the salvation of the WNBA. And fans are saying, look, I'm gonna watch here regardless because I enjoy women's basketball. And they're like, I don't really need you for that reason. And I think ultimately there needs to be more time given so that those fans can find other players that they like. And, maybe you're watching the Fever play the Seattle Storm and you're seeing somebody like Jewel Lloyd or Skylar Diggins Smith, and you're just like, oh wow, that player is really talented, right? And maybe you become a fan of them as well, and it exposes you more. We should want more people to be exposed to it because ultimately we are seeing the growth of the WNBA in real time, right? What happened in the 80s and the 90s in the NBA is what we're seeing now. The charter flight thing. In the 80s, they didn't have charter flights in the NBA until the league got better, and then that started to be a thing in the 90s. And now they have it in the WNBA as well. We are going to see their salaries increase as they should once they elevate even more and get that next media deal, right? You may fairly argue that they should have gotten it before, but this is where we're at, right? And there is going to be an increase, and it is already happening, and it's going to continue to happen. Caitlin Clark is at the forefront of that. I want to bring it back, lastly, to the Olympic thing again. The argument and has been that is it about winning or is it about growing the women's game? Nikki Gist, who I follow on X/Twitter, who's a reporter for the New York Giants. She does a lot of stuff for them, but has also been covering the New York Liberty this summer for the first time. She has a background in marketing, and she's saying that, hey, look, the WNBA needs to embrace the fact, and U.S. basketball needs to embrace the fact that they have a marketing opportunity with Caitlin Clark here to get a lot of eyeballs on the Olympics. The counter opinion to that has been, we don't care about that. We want to win gold medals, right? We want to field the best team possible to ensure that we're winning. And I think both arguments are sound, right? If you want to grow the women's basketball game internationally, then, showcasing somebody like Clark makes a lot of sense. But also, you want to field your best possible team. And if you don't feel that Caitlin Clark gives you that opportunity right now, then that's fine. You don't pick her, right? So I think that the growth of this game is going to happen organically, and it's continuing to happen. Would it have it been accelerated if Caitlin Clark was on the U.S. national team? Perhaps. Would they have still won gold regardless? Maybe. But I think that the important discussion that we're having here is that the women's game does need to be proliferated. It does need to be highlighted more. I think we all agree with that. And it seems like Caitlin Clark is that vessel. But there is also a thing where maybe we're putting a little bit too much on her shoulders and discounting at the expense of other great players, where the conversation has been, well, people are only going to watch because of Caitlin Clark, right? This is the only player they care about, only player they're ever going to care about because the rest of your league sucks, right? That's kind of the perception and the messaging that's coming across. When in reality, people say, look, man, watch AJ Wilson, watch Jewel Lloyd, watch Sabrina Ionescu. Like, these are high level basketball players. And even like this rookie class, this has kind of been heralded as this great rookie class. It's not just because of Caitlin Clark. Angel Reese has looked great. Cameron Brink has looked great. Right? There have been great players to come out of this draft class who are kind of paving the way for the future of the WNBA. So when it comes back to Caitlin Clark, she's going to figure it out. She's going to make Olympic teams. She's going to, may help usher in a new era of prosperity for the WNBA. There is no doubt in my mind that that's going to happen. But we can't just try and force it and then continue to engage in these bad faith discussions that end up being dripped in sexism. Or, if you're somebody like Dave Portnoy, who went on this little video rant the other day about, I'm only watching for Caitlin Clark, so if you're not on the Olympics and I'm not going to watch, then you ultimately didn't care about women's basketball, right? And I think that's kind of a situation now where people are kind of telling on themselves. The idea should be that you enjoy the game and that the player that you like comes in, makes you enjoy it more. Classic example as LeBron James. LeBron James is probably one of the first players that has had the power to move fandom. And what I mean by that is, when he was in Cleveland, everybody's wearing Cleveland gear. He goes to Miami. Well, I'm a LeBron fan. I'm going to follow LeBron, right? When he goes back to Cleveland, they follow him back to Cleveland. Now they're, wearing Lakers gear. He's been one of the first players that have done that. But what happens with LeBron fans is that they also end up, by proxy, appreciating the game more because they're watching so much LeBron. And they say, oh, wow, this Steph Curry guy is pretty good. This Kevin Durant guy is pretty good. And I think that's what you want to hope for Caitlin Clark. Now, for her fans, missing out on the Olympics probably hurts. But in reality, it's probably really good for her career. I think the real issue what we're having right now is the WNBA season starts way too soon after the draft, and not that far after the college season is over. So, that's something that's maybe an opportunity for change. But she needs some rest here because it's been nonstop ever since March, between draft prep and training camp and games that are tightly scheduled. So she could use that Olympic break, I think, and then take that to just go balls to the wall next year and elevate this team into the next level alongside Aaliyah Boston. Ultimately, Caitlin Clark's going to figure it out. We all know she's going to figure it out. And all this hand-wringing about doing the league and the game of women's basketball a disservice by not having her on the Olympics, I feel is short-sighted. Right? I think the big-term picture, long-term vision, the big vision is that in the next 5 years, we're going to see an exponential growth of women's basketball. And that's going to ultimately be tied into her success as a player. All right, guys, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Deep Cover Podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please rate, review, and subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you want to catch any of my written articles, you can catch those on Medium at omarzaran.medium.com. Thanks for tuning in to another episode, and we will see you guys next week.